The subway car rattled through the underground tunnel, the dim lights flickering slightly as it sped forward. Malik sat near the window, his headphones in, lost in his own world. It had been a long day, and all he wanted was to get home, eat something, and crash. But fate had other plans. As the train pulled into the next station, the doors slid open, and a pregnant woman stepped inside, one hand resting on her stomach. She looked exhausted, her eyes scanning for an empty seat, but the car was packed. People avoided eye contact, too absorbed in their phones or pretending not to notice. Malik didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, he pulled his headphones down and stood up. "Here, you can take my seat," he said with a small smile. The woman's tired expression softened into one of gratitude. "Thank you," she said as she carefully lowered herself into the seat. Malik gave her a polite nod and grabbed onto one of the overhead handles. The train lurched forward again, rocking slightly as it moved through the tunnel. He didn't think much more of it, just another small act of kindness in a world that often seemed too busy to care. But then, something unexpected happened. The woman reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small folded note, and pressed it into his hand. Her fingers trembled slightly as she made sure he took it. "Read this when you get home," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the train. Malik frowned, caught off guard. Okay." She didn't say anything else, just looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite place, something between fear and urgency. The train screeched as it pulled into the next station. Before Malik could ask her anything, she stood up quickly and disappeared into the crowd. He glanced down at the note in his hand. It was small, slightly crumpled, and something about it sent a chill down his spine. He shoved it into his pocket and decided he'd deal with it later. Little did he know, that note was about to change everything. Hours later, Malik sat in his small apartment, the city lights glowing faintly outside his window. He tossed his jacket onto the couch and pulled the note from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. The writing was hurried, almost frantic. They took them. All of them. It started 27 years ago. If you want the truth, find the red door on Maple Street. But be careful. They're still watching. Malik's stomach tightened. What was this? Some kind of prank? A mistake? His mind flashed back to the woman's face, how she had looked at him, the way her hands had trembled. This wasn't a joke. He grabbed his phone and typed Red Door Maple Street into the search bar. Nothing. No news articles, no strange reports, just a normal residential area. But something about this felt too real to ignore. Taking a deep breath, Malik grabbed his keys. There was only one way to find out the truth. Malik hesitated for a moment, staring at the note again. The words felt heavier now, as if they carried a weight he wasn't ready to hold. But something inside him wouldn't let it go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way the woman's voice had shaken when she pressed the paper into his hand. Either way, he knew he couldn't just forget about it. He grabbed his hoodie and slipped it over his head, the chill of the night settling in as he stepped outside. The city was quieter at this hour, the distant hum of traffic and occasional sirens blending into the background. He pulled up the GPS on his phone, typing in Maple Street, and started walking. The streets felt different tonight, like they were holding secrets just beneath the surface. Malik's footsteps echoed against the sidewalk as he moved through the nearly empty streets. The red door. What could it possibly mean? And why did she say they were still watching? As he turned onto Maple Street, his eyes scanned the row of houses, looking for anything unusual. Most of them were older, their paint peeling, windows dark. But then, about halfway down the block, he saw it. A door. Deep red. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just the color that made it stand out, it was the fact that this house looked abandoned. The windows were covered in grime, the porch steps cracked, weeds growing up through the gaps. Something about it sent a chill down his spine. Malik swallowed hard. He could turn back now. Pretend he never saw the note, never met the woman on the train. But something in his gut told him this was important. He stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking under his weight. He raised a hand to knock but hesitated. Was this even safe? He glanced around the street. It was too quiet. Almost unnaturally quiet. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. Once. Twice. Silence. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. He tried the doorknob. Locked. For a moment, he thought about leaving. But just as he turned to go, something moved inside. A faint shadow passing behind the dirty window. Malik froze. Then, the door clicked. Slowly, it creaked open just an inch, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. His heart pounded in his chest. He stepped forward, peering inside. "Hello." His voice was barely more than a whisper. No response. Everything in his brain screamed at him to leave. But his feet moved forward. He stepped inside. The door shut behind him with a soft click. The air inside was thick, stale. It smelled of dust and something else, something he couldn't quite place. The only light came from the street lamp filtering through the window, casting eerie shadows across the wooden floor. The house was empty. At least, it looked that way. No furniture. No signs of life. Just silence. Then, a soft sound. A shuffle. Malik's breath caught in his throat. He turned toward the noise, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. And then he saw it. A picture frame lying face down on the floor. Slowly, he bent down and picked it up, turning it over. His stomach dropped. It was a class photo. A group of kids, all smiling, lined up neatly in their school uniforms. The words at the bottom read, St. Vincent Academy, Class of '96. Malik's hands tightened around the frame. This was from 27 years ago. And then he noticed something even stranger. Each of the kids in the picture had a small red X drawn over their faces. All except one. A girl in the front row. Her face was circled in red ink. His fingers traced the image, a strange unease settling in his chest. Who was she? And why was she the only one left unmarked? Then, a whisper. Low. Faint. Coming from somewhere deeper inside the house. Malik's heart pounded. He wasn't alone. Malik's grip on the picture tightened as his pulse thundered in his ears. The whisper had been soft, almost like a breath of wind, but it was real. He wasn't imagining it. His eyes darted toward the dark hallway stretching deeper into the house. Shadows twisted along the peeling wallpaper, the dim light from the street barely reaching past the front door. He swallowed hard, forcing his feet to stay planted. His instincts told him to leave, to turn around and pretend he had never set foot in this place. But something about the photo in his hand made it impossible. The red circle around the girl's face. The eerie absence of any furniture or signs of life. The note from the woman on the subway. He turned the frame over, hoping for some kind of clue. Faded handwriting on the back read, class photo taken before it happened. She was the only one left. She knows. Before what happened? And who was she? Another sound echoed through the house, this time a soft creak, like the shifting of weight against an old wooden floor. Malik's breath caught. Someone was here. A voice, barely above a whisper, spoke from the darkness ahead. You shouldn't be here. Malik tensed. His fingers curled into a fist around the photo. The voice was female, shaky yet firm. He stepped forward, peering into the hallway. Who's there? His voice came out steadier than he expected. Silence. A long, heavy pause stretched between him and the darkness. Then, finally, I tried to warn her. Malik's heart pounded. Warn who? A shadow moved. A faint outline of a figure standing at the end of the hall, just beyond where the light reached. The woman on the train, the voice whispered. She shouldn't have involved you. Malik's stomach twisted. Who are you? The figure hesitated, then stepped forward just enough for the dim light to catch her face. She was young, maybe in her early 40s, her dark hair streaked with grey. Her eyes were sharp, filled with something Malik couldn't quite read, fear, maybe, or regret. You don't understand what you've walked into, she said. This isn't just a mystery. It's a warning. Malik took a cautious step forward. A warning about what? Her gaze flickered to the picture in his hands. You found it. Malik nodded. Who is she? He pointed to the girl circled in red. And what happened to the rest of them? The woman exhaled, her shoulders sinking slightly as if she had been carrying something heavy for far too long. They vanished. Malik felt a chill run through him. Vanished? She nodded. 27 years ago. They were in class one day, and then, gone. No explanation. No bodies. No sign of a struggle. Just gone. Malik tried to process her words. And the girl in the photo? She survived, the woman said. But she never spoke about it. Not once. And then one day, she disappeared too. A sharp pang of unease settled in Malik's chest. People tried to forget, the woman continued. The school was shut down, the town moved on. But the truth was never buried. Some of us kept searching. And we found things we weren't supposed to. Malik's fingers tightened around the photo. Things like what? The woman hesitated. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, "It wasn't an accident." Malik's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" She took another cautious step forward, lowering her voice even more. "They were taken." The words sent a shiver down Malik's spine. "By who?" he pressed. The woman shook her head. "Not who. What?" A heavy silence filled the air, stretching between them. Malik felt the weight of her words, the way they hung there like an unanswered question. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. The missing class. The girl who survived. The warning in the note. And now, this some unseen force behind it all. The woman stepped closer, her eyes sharp. "If you value your life, walk away now." Malik met her gaze, his pulse hammering. He knew he should listen. But something inside him told him this wasn't over. Not yet. Malik's breathing was steady, but his mind raced with questions. The woman's warning echoed in his head, but he wasn't ready to walk away, not when he was this close to uncovering the truth. He gripped the photo tightly and took another step forward. The woman's eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe frustration. She had told him to leave, but deep down, she knew he wouldn't. "I need to know," Malik said, his voice low but firm. "Who took them? What happened to that girl?" The woman hesitated, glancing toward the dark hallway behind her as if she expected something or someone to emerge. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They came at night," she said. "No one heard a thing. No one saw anything. One moment, the class was there, the next, they were gone." Malik felt a cold chill run down his spine. But how is that possible? A whole classroom of kids doesn't just disappear. The woman shook her head. Unless someone wanted them to. The words hung heavy in the air. Malik tried to piece it together, but the more he thought about it, the less sense it made. If this had been some crime, some human act, there would have been evidence. But from the way she spoke, it sounded like something else, something unexplainable. "The girl who survived," Malik said slowly. "She must have known something. That's why she was marked in the photo." The woman's face darkened. She was different after that day. Distant. Paranoid. She never went back to school. She never talked about what she saw. Malik's pulse quickened. "Do you know her name?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Rebecca Holloway." The name sent a jolt through Malik. It sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Where is she now?" The woman swallowed hard. "That's the thing. She disappeared, too." Malik's grip tightened on the photo. "You said she survived." "She did. For a while." The woman's voice dropped lower. "And then, about 10 years ago, she vanished. No explanation. No trail. Just like the others." A knot formed in Malik's stomach. This wasn't just an old mystery, whatever happened back then was still happening. He could feel it. And if Rebecca Holloway had disappeared too, it meant whoever, or whatever, was behind this wasn't finished. "I need to find her," Malik said. The woman gave him a long, searching look. "You don't understand what you're asking." "I don't care." Malik's voice was steady. "I can't just walk away." The woman sighed, running a hand through her dark hair. She looked like she was about to argue, but then something changed. A decision flickered across her face. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "This is the last known address we had for her," she said, handing it to him. "It's old." She may not be there anymore. Malik took it, unfolding it carefully. An address was scrawled in shaky handwriting. It wasn't far. The woman took a step back. I can't go with you. And if you're smart, you won't go either. Malik met her gaze. I have to. She studied him for a long moment, then finally nodded. Then be careful. If she's still alive, she won't trust you. And if they are still watching, you won't be safe. With that, she turned and disappeared into the shadows of the house, leaving Malik standing alone in the dim light. He glanced back at the red door one last time before stepping outside. The night air hit him like a wave, cold and heavy. He looked down at the address in his hand, his fingers tightening around the paper. He had come too far to stop now. He started walking. As he moved through the empty streets, a strange sensation settled in his gut, a feeling that he wasn't alone. The quiet wasn't normal. The city was never this silent. His eyes darted toward the shadows between the buildings. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Someone was watching him. He could feel it. Malik quickened his pace. The address wasn't far. If he could just get there. A sound behind him. Footsteps. He turned sharply. Nothing. Just the empty street stretching behind him. But his pulse was racing now. He wasn't imagining it. He forced himself to keep moving, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. He checked the address again. 2 more blocks. Almost there. Another sound. This time, closer. Malik's breath came faster. He broke into a jog, his eyes scanning the street ahead. There, a small apartment building, its windows dark, its paint peeling. The address matched. He didn't slow down. He ran up the front steps and pounded on the door. Silence. He knocked again, harder this time. Rebecca. His voice was urgent. I need to talk to you. Still nothing. He tried the doorknob. Locked. Then, movement. From inside. A shadow passed behind the curtains of the front window. Someone was in there. Malik's heart pounded. Rebecca, please, I don't have much time. A pause. Then, slowly, the door unlocked with a soft click. Malik swallowed hard and pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with dust and something else, something unfamiliar. The apartment was dimly lit, the curtains drawn. Papers were scattered across a table, old newspapers, torn notes. And then he saw her. Rebecca Holloway. She stood in the far corner, her back pressed against the wall, eyes wide with fear. She looked older than he expected, worn down, like someone who had spent years running from something unseen. You shouldn't be here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Malik held up the photo. I need to know the truth. Her gaze flickered to the picture, and for a split second, something shifted in her expression, recognition, pain. But then she shook her head. They're coming, she whispered. A chill ran through Malik. Who? Rebecca's breath quickened. Her hands trembled. You don't understand. They never stopped looking. The words sent a jolt through him. And then, a knock at the door. Not a normal knock. Slow. Deliberate. Heavy. Rebecca's eyes went wide with terror. Malik barely had time to react before she grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. It's too late, she breathed. They found you. Malik's pulse pounded in his ears. The knock on the door was slow, heavy, deliberate. It wasn't just someone looking for Rebecca, it was someone who knew they were inside. Someone who had been waiting. Rebecca's grip on his wrist tightened. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes wild with fear. You need to leave, she whispered, barely audible. Now. But Malik couldn't move. His feet were rooted to the floor, every instinct screaming that if he ran, if he made a single noise, whoever was on the other side of that door would know. And they wouldn't let him leave. Another knock. Louder this time. Rebecca took a shaky step back, her fingers trembling as she pointed toward the small hallway at the back of the apartment. There's a fire escape. Go down 2 floors, take the alley. Don't look back. Malik hesitated. I can't just leave you here. Her expression hardened. You don't have a choice. The doorknob rattled. Malik's body went rigid. Whoever it was, they weren't waiting for permission anymore. Rebecca shoved him toward the hallway. "Go," she hissed. He didn't have time to argue. He turned and darted down the narrow corridor, his mind racing. He spotted the window at the end of the hall, the metal frame of the fire escape just beyond the glass. He reached for the latch. And then he heard it. The door burst open. A guttural, inhuman noise filled the air, a sound that didn't belong to any person Malik had ever heard. His breath caught in his throat as he turned just enough to see the dark silhouette moving into the apartment. Rebecca didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just whispered, "Run." Malik yanked the window open and climbed onto the fire escape, the cold metal biting into his palms. He didn't stop. He didn't think. He just moved, descending the rusted stairs as fast as he could without making a sound. Above him, the apartment was eerily silent. No sounds of struggle. No shouts. Just that awful, suffocating quiet. Then, something shifted. A dark shadow passed behind the window. And suddenly, Malik knew. Rebecca hadn't been trying to save herself. She had been buying him time. His chest tightened, but he forced himself to keep moving. He hit the last step, landing in the alley below. The street was empty, the dim glow of streetlights casting long, eerie shadows against the brick walls. He had to get out of there. Now. He stumbled forward, his mind racing. What had he just seen? What was that sound? And what had happened to Rebecca? He barely made it a few feet before he realized. He wasn't alone. A figure stood at the mouth of the alley, tall, still, watching him. Malik's breath caught. He took a slow step back, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. The figure didn't move, but there was something unnatural about the way they stood, like they were waiting. Like they already knew what he was going to do next. And then, a voice. Low. Unfamiliar. "You were never supposed to find her." Malik didn't wait to hear more. He turned and ran. His feet pounded against the pavement as he tore through the darkened streets. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. But no matter how fast he ran, that feeling stayed with him. The feeling that he was being followed. That whoever, or whatever, was behind this wasn't done with him yet. Malik ran until his legs ached, his lungs burning with every breath. The city around him blurred, the empty streets stretching endlessly. His mind screamed at him to stop, to look back, but he knew better. Whatever was following him, whatever had taken Rebecca, wasn't far behind. He had to keep moving. The dim glow of a neon sign caught his eye, a diner, still open despite the late hour. Without thinking, he pushed through the door, the bell above jingling. The warm scent of coffee and fried food filled the air, a stark contrast to the icy fear gripping his chest. A few customers sat scattered in booths, oblivious to the panic in his eyes. The waitress behind the counter glanced up, her brow furrowing. "You okay, hun?" Malik could barely get the words out. I need a phone." She nodded toward the far wall, where an old payphone hung next to a rack of newspapers. He rushed over, fumbling for coins before realizing he didn't even know who to call. The police. They wouldn't believe him. A friend. What would he even say? His fingers hovered over the dial when he saw it. The newspaper. The front page stared back at him, the bold letters sending a fresh wave of cold through his veins. 27 years ago, the class that vanished without a trace. His pulse pounded as he snatched up the paper, his eyes scanning the article. The faces staring back at him were eerily familiar. One of them was Rebecca. His breath hitched. It didn't make sense. The article described a group of students from a local school, all of whom disappeared during a field trip nearly 3 decades ago. Search efforts had turned up nothing. No evidence, no leads. Just gone. But that couldn't be right. Rebecca wasn't some missing kid from 27 years ago. She was here, she was real. Or at least, she had been. A chill ran down his spine as a thought crept into his mind. What if Rebecca had never truly left that place? What if she had only been borrowing time? The payphone crackled. Malik hadn't touched it, hadn't even lifted the receiver. But now, the dial tone was gone, replaced by a low static. And then, a voice. "You should have left it alone." Malik's heart stopped. The voice was deep, distorted. It wasn't coming from anyone in the diner. It was coming from inside the phone. He dropped the receiver, stumbling back. The other customers didn't react, as if they hadn't heard a thing. The waitress shot him a concerned glance, but Malik didn't stay to explain. He shoved the newspaper under his jacket and bolted out the door. The city felt different now. The streets stretched longer, the buildings taller, shadows curling in the corners of his vision. It was as if the very fabric of reality was shifting around him. And then, he saw her. Rebecca. Standing at the end of the block, watching him. Malik's breath caught. He ran toward her, his mind racing with questions. Rebecca, he called. She didn't move. As he got closer, he realized something was wrong. Her face was too still, her eyes vacant. When he finally reached her, she whispered one word. Run. Then, she vanished. Not into an alley. Not behind a building. Just gone. Malik staggered back, his heart hammering. He knew now. Rebecca had never truly escaped whatever had taken her class all those years ago. And now, neither had he. The streetlights flickered. The air grew heavy, thick with something unseen. Malik turned, ready to run. But the figure from the alley was already there. Closer this time. And smiling. Malik's breath hitched as he took a step back, his pulse hammering in his ears. The figure in front of him, the same one from the alley, stood motionless, their smile unnatural, too wide, like they knew something he didn't. The city around him felt warped, the streets stretching impossibly long, the air thick like a heavy fog pressing against his skin. He turned to run, but his legs felt slow, heavy, like he was wading through water. The figure didn't chase him. They didn't need to. You were never supposed to see. The voice came again, low and calm, like it wasn't threatening him at all. Like it was simply stating a fact. Malik forced himself to move, pushing forward with everything he had. The sidewalk beneath him seemed endless, the streetlights flickering as he ran. He had no destination, only the desperate urge to get away. But deep down, he knew there was no outrunning this. Then, out of nowhere, the noise of the city returned. The street felt normal again. The buildings solid, the distant hum of traffic filling the air. Malik's pace slowed as he glanced back. The figure was gone. For a moment, he just stood there, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it been real? Or had his mind twisted the fear into something worse? He reached into his jacket and pulled out the newspaper. The front page still bore the same headline, 27 years ago, the class that vanished without a trace. He flipped through the pages, scanning the details. The students had gone missing during a school trip, but there was one part he hadn't noticed before, a single sentence buried near the bottom of the article. One survivor was found wandering the streets hours later, unable to recall what had happened. Malik's hands tightened around the paper. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes landed on the grainy, black and white photo of that survivor. It was Rebecca. He knew, then, why she had been so afraid. Why she had begged him to leave. She had escaped whatever had taken them, but only for a time. And now, something had come back for her. Malik thought of the way she had looked at him in those last moments. The warning in her voice. The way she had whispered that single word, run. She had known. And now, Malik knew too. Whatever had taken those students all those years ago wasn't bound by time. It had waited. It had watched. And when Rebecca got too close to the truth, it had come for her. Just like it had come for him. A cold chill ran down his spine as he folded the newspaper and shoved it back into his jacket. He had questions, so many questions, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting. And so was whatever had been hiding in the dark.